This is not a credit card. This is a room key that I'm fiddling with. So nobody try to freeze frame and get my information or anything. This would be a good video to have some graphics with. Maybe I'll make some. Maybe somebody else will, but I won't hold my breath for that. But this is how I visualize language to, as a preface to explaining some other things. So one thing people tell you about language is that words have to have definite meanings. Or else, how would language work? How would we convey information if words didn't have particular definite meanings? How would it work? They can't think of a way, so there must not be a way. Except for, I think language is made of words that are intervals. So an interval. So to use like a mathematical metaphor, for example, take the word tall. Let's say you think anybody over 6 foot in height is tall, and I think anybody over more, like 6'6" is tall. Okay. So it's an interval. It's open-ended on one because obviously, taller than, so it goes up to infinity, or to the finite height of the tallest human, or possibly the finite height of the tallest human we've ever encountered. But anyway, it's some sort of an interval. So if one of us sees someone 7 foot tall, and we say, oh, that person's tall, then the communication's pretty clear, right? We understood. Now, there's still an unknown quantity, and it's the difference between the boundaries. Because if I say the person's tall, maybe they're just 6'2" as far as you think. Really, for me to say that, it has to be someone taller than 6'6". But part of the point of using the word tall is, that doesn't matter. It's a tall person. If the person really satisfies both of our criteria, then there's a successful communication with a little bit of an unknown interval to it. Okay. If the person is 6'2", obviously one of us will say that the person's tall. The other one wouldn't necessarily say that. So that's pretty much how I see the words working. Now, you can add to that the relativistic, or like my situation where, okay, I know you might have a different definition of the word tall, and so, I know that some people say that 6'2" is tall. So, I might have suspicions by using other people's definitions or being familiar with them. Okay, now the other thing is I'd sort of actually like to visualize these intervals in terms of a two-dimensional spatial interval and a color. So a shape, so a two-dimensional shape and a color pattern within that, right? So it's like a little smear of rainbow color. It could be a solid monochrome, but, it could be a little splattering of color. All right. Now another thing you notice about this, if you pay attention, let's use a simple example. Let's say there was a language that had a circle, right, a square, and a star, right, a 5-point star. A circle, a square, and a star, and that's the language. And a position, so graph paper with a quadrant of just four. Not really graph paper, but just a quadrant of four um, sections, so the language can say the order clockwise. Let's say it starts from the upper left square and goes clockwise. So then 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you have a circle in that square and the star in the next one, it's better than not have a square actually. Square is good for the empty space. Let's say square makes empty space. So you got a circle, and you got a triangle, and you got a plus. That's right. And then you have an empty space, which is represented by a square. So anyway, you have these different things you can state, and basically the words can be transmorphed into a picture. Well, what if you're looking at the real world And you're like, I want to describe that. I want to write it down. Not just for another person, maybe for you to remember yourself. And so you see it and you write it down. But imagine that the square, or that the plus inside, has wiggly lines. Instead of being a straight kind of it's wiggly lines for the plus. It's not exactly like a plus. But that's the closest thing. So if somebody reads your words, including you later after you've forgotten what you saw, uh, and they were to draw a rendition of it, they would draw a regular plus, not with the wiggly lines, because your language doesn't have a wiggly line, you know, suggestion. Part of my view of language is that you can propose and create that. You would over time create that. You would know, well, this wasn't quite right, but it was just the closest thing. What can I do to get it closer? Um, But there's also a time where you don't have that language to get it closer, and when you create it, it'll be personal, and you'll have to convey that to other people somehow. So anyway, even if you were to uh, read what you had written, when you read plus, you wouldn't know it was wiggly lines. Now, if you did remember that, then reading that with the plus will invoke the picture, the memory that's more photographic and more experiential, that's more like the original, and you'll remember the way it is. Okay, and of course, this is how you capture the difference in the fact that you need new language. But anyway, the point really is that when you convey that to somebody else, they're going to get a little bit of a distortion, right? And this to me is how language works. Why there's always differences in the meaning. And to me, we don't really have to explain why information is conveyed. We do convey and seem to convey information is pretty convincing. All the learning we've done, and for better or worse, information seems to be conveyed. And the real thing is to focus on how it gets distorted, because we make assumptions that the information is coming through clear. So it's from the philosophical point of view, it's like you want to start from nothing and can describe why how the information is conveyed so well or so perfectly or at all. But from our experience, I think we know the information is conveyed. We do have to explain it, but I like to explain it in terms of the distortions that naturally happen. Not assuming couldn't happen, and here's how it happens with the perfect definitions, but more like here it is happening. But what sort of distortions are involved in this? Can we predict what sort of distortions? And this is one that you see a pattern. You have a word for something that's only going to be similar to that. And when you put it into words, later on you're going to map it back into an image. And there's going to be a distortion because it's going to be all cleaned up and look like it's made out of words. When in reality it was, infinitely complex and you just picked out what you could. Now the plus with the wiggly lines is a near miss. That's fine. All lines are wiggly actually ultimately. So you might even think it likely to understand that even without a word in the language. That, well, it wasn't exactly a square, it wasn't exactly a circle. But what if instead of a star, square, or circle, you have a triangle? What are you going to use to represent that? Is that more like the five-pointed star, or is it more like a square? Or maybe you'll create a new image that's the five-pointed star and the square. If you have a line in your language, well, you'll easily create this new polygon. So, and that's an interesting question. Do you get the line and create the polygons, or do you have all the polygons and go, hey, line, segment? But anyway, so this is how I see language. That it starts with an image. We have words that match patterns. They're more sophisticated than these metaphors imply because like if you think just of the visual image, take the image of a rabbit. I can see a rabbit from just about any angle and recognize a rabbit. The image in my head is actually this three-dimensional thing that I can take projections of. But it's also just a bunch of sort of photographs of the fact that I have seen a rabbit from all different angles. I used to have a pet rabbit, and